Even though I was named Future, I can't choose one of my own. It's a bitter kind of irony.
This week in gaming, Valve has removed nearly 200 games from Steam, for good reason. A major update hit Pyre, an autumn update has come to Rocket League, the SNES Classic has been released at long last, cross-play between GOG and Steam users came to Tooth and Tail, PS4 and PC is on its way, the Ataribox has been unveiled, partly, we have some thoughts on the Netflix of game service Jump, BioWare's Anthem is set to receive a beta and we still have no idea when, the Wii Shop channel is shutting down on January 31st, 2019, and Xbox Live Indie Games is dead next week, so buy your XBLIG titles while you still can. This is 1RBC Gaming Weekly.
Juliana, stop. We are professional combat operators. Whatever your reason to fight, never let hatred fuel you.
This isn't a peacekeeping operation anymore. Taking part in the invasion of another country? Do you really think this is the kind of behavior that will lead to peace?
First off, Atari's new console that they teased earlier in the year has been partially unveiled. It looks pretty artisan. They've gone back to their roots, having based the appearance of the device on the Atari 2600, if that vintage machine got stomped flat by Apple's design sensibilities circa 2005. That's not vinyl, folks, that's real wood. According to the official press release, the device will be running a customized edition of Linux, which will be usable as a general PC, but is geared towards gaming. There are plans to preload Atari games onto the device. It's set to ship late spring 2018, with different configurations of the Ataribox ranging in price from $249 to $299 US. You'll eventually be able to pre-order the device through an Indiegogo campaign, which is set to launch sometime this autumn. Personally, I'm not sure what to think of this. I think the concept of the game console is perhaps a little bit dated. Unless you're bringing something new to the table, as Nintendo has with the Switch and its portability, all that consoles seem to have going for them right now is ease of use. Otherwise, they're just machines for downloading video games onto. Something that I can do with ease on a PC. How the Ataribox will differentiate itself from the failed Steam boxes that emerged around Valve's own customized Linux distribution remains to be seen. One thing is clear, however. This isn't a competitor to the Xbox and PlayStation. While the specs of the device's AMD-based chipset is to be revealed, it seems to be banking heavily on nostalgia thus far, more so than unique features. That said, perhaps something special will be revealed when the Indiegogo campaign comes around? Perhaps. We'll be keeping an eye on the Ataribox to see just how it turns out. Stick with us for further coverage. While we're talking about old consoles, this week the SNES Classic hit store shelves. This machine is a miniature version of the SNES. It includes Star Fox, Final Fantasy VI, which was called Final Fantasy III when released in the US, due to the fact that Squeenix didn't localize 3 other Final Fantasy games in the series until the 2000s, Mega Man X, Secret of Mana, Super Metroid, Super Mario World, and the previously unreleased Star Fox 2. There are a grand total of 21 games on the system, which ships with a pair of controllers. Unfortunately, it seems that the United States is stuck with the lame purple buttons. The European edition of the SNES Classic, called the Mini, we're showing its trailer right now in fact, is way cooler. This isn't the first time that Nintendo has released a mini retro console. The NES Classic came out last year, and much to the chagrin of most people who wanted one, it was criminally underproduced, leading to scalping on eBay. Nintendo has said that it won't be repeating that mistake with the SNES Classic, and that they're restarting production on the NES Classic. What do you think? Is the SNES Classic a good deal? Are you disappointed that it inexplicably doesn't include Chrono Trigger, which is in my objective opinion the best game of the era that needs to be played by everybody? Hit us up on Twitter at OneWorldBeCool and share your thoughts. In other Nintendo news, the Nintendo World Championships 2017 are happening next week, October 7th, 2017, in New York City. This week, Nintendo dropped a trailer for the competition, along with the announcement that Metroid: Samus Returns will be one of the games included in the competition. The Nintendo World Championships kicked off in 1990 during the time period that may as well be referred to as Peak Nintendo, and then vanished for a good long time before re-emerging in 2015. If you happen to be in the city next week, why not check them out? If you couldn't get into NYCC, it looks like some geeky good fun. Just be aware that tickets are being given away to the event on a first-come, first-served basis, so you'd better arrive
Already
early.
in New York that weekend? Then come out and witness the action. Tickets are free and will be distributed at the door on a first-come, first-served basis. Seating will be extremely limited, so don't miss your chance to be a part of Nintendo gaming history.
All the games from Silicon Echo Studios and Zonatron Productions were removed from Steam this week. These games were trading card mills and asset flips. Essentially, they were fake games. What's the point of fake games, you ask? Well, a while ago, Valve introduced trading cards to Steam. These are collectible cards that will be dropped by games as you played and added into your inventory. Now, you could sell these cards to other players for store credit, or you could craft them into items once you had a full set. On the one hand, this system is pretty cool. Suppose you're a broke kid who wants a game badly enough, you could scrounge together Steam store credit from sold trading cards and a few in-game items, and boom, you can afford that game once it goes on sale. Unfortunately, this system was abused as shovelware pushers created games solely for the purpose of milling cards. It's like the worst imaginable version of the stock market, well, maybe second worst imaginable version, and it left the Steam service clogged with fake games. Many of the games for sale by these publishers weren't even games in the first place, but as we said earlier, Unity asset flips. Essentially some bits of code and a few art assets, but nothing actually worth playing. Nothing of value has been lost from these publishers being kicked off of Steam. Hopefully this discourages the behavior in the future. Earlier this month, a service called Jump debuted for Mac, Windows, and Linux, as well as VR platforms. Jump is a subscription-based service for indie games. Founded by Anthony Palma, CEO of Kermdinger Studios, Jump seeks to solve the problem that plagues indie game devs in this day and age. The problem of discoverability. Essentially, the trouble with PC gaming nowadays is that dozens of games are released daily. What's more important to gamers than having an infinite library of games at their fingertips is having worthwhile games to play. Most of the games that get released just aren't that great. Most are just alright. Time is a finite and precious resource. Life itself is a precious gift. Too short to play mediocre video games. Generally, gamers will depend on word of mouth to find out about good games, but they'll also check out reviews and video game news programs such as the one you're looking at right now. However, a lot of good games still manage to slip through the cracks, as it were. Hence, Jump comes into the picture. Currently in beta on PC, it costs $10 a month and grants players access to over 60 games that are, according to its sites, highly curated and on demand. It's being billed as the Netflix of indie games. In an AMA on Reddit, Mr. Palma said that his goal with the service isn't quite to replace Steam, but to offer players a simple way to bypass the shovelware that's present on Steam. From what I've been hearing thus far, the service works quite well. Rather than having players download the games in their entirety, the service downloads games a bit at a time. According to Jump, this is not a streaming service, as the games are running locally on your computer, just in chunks. According to the players, there's no issue with latency. As to whether or not it's worth paying $10 a month for, that's up to you. Personally, it's not what I'm looking for, as I have a lot of great games that I have yet to play just sitting there in my library. Hello, Hob. That said, if you're curious about the world of indie games, perhaps you're new to PC gaming and you'd like to try out some fantastic games without quite committing to a purchase, this seems like a great route. Jump pays indie devs based on how long their games are played. It's a bit like Amazon's Kindle Unlimited service, which pays participating authors based on how many pages readers go through. So is Jump viable in the long term? I think it could be, but only if it stays easy for players to discover new games through the service. Netflix has algorithms running in the background that are always watching what you're watching, and the service makes recommendations based on what you've spent the most time with, coupled with an internal tagging system that puts each show and film into categories that go beyond genre and reach into pacing, themes, etc. There are 60 games on Jump right now from a nice variety of developers, ranging from frenetic multiplayer FPS Robot Roller Derby Disco Dodgeball to brief, sad visual novel Actual Sunlight to MC Escher-inspired puzzler The Bridge. Right now, there's a little something for everybody, which is fantastic, but what happens when players want more? For instance, they might love the quirky atmosphere of Diaries of a Spaceport Janitor and want more games in the same vein, or perhaps they're huge fans of the innovative gameplay of Super Lovely Planet and wish for a multiplayer experience akin to it. Would the system then recommend Disco Dodgeball? Further, what happens if you're a developer and you've made a short game? The multiplayer-oriented Disco Dodgeball is something that you can play forever, but Actual Sunlight takes about an hour to get through. While Jump may be helpful for putting your game in front of an audience, you probably won't see huge profits from it if your game is short. The devs behind Jump recognize the problem for short games as a matter of timing. During the AMA, Mr. Palma said regarding short games that they're best suited to come to Jump at the end of their premium lifecycle. Basically, once everybody who would have already bought these games has, the next step would be for these games to make the leap to Jump. Rather the same way that, once everybody who would have seen the movie in theaters and bought the DVD already has, the next step is to put it on Netflix. For Jump, these are the early days. If developers play their cards right, gathering the correct data to build their algorithms, this may be the start of something beautiful. While Jump isn't quite what I'm looking for personally, I do have to say that thus far they've picked a lot of fantastic games. Seriously, Teslagrad is criminally underrated, and Robot Roller Derby Disco Dodgeball is an incredibly creative take on the FPS. According to Jump, they're looking to add 6 to 10 carefully curated games to the service every month. Games are largely selected based upon 2 factors: critical response, that is, awards won, high review scores from players and press, etc., and high sales. Now, these aren't the only factors. In fact, it seems that making high sales a factor is a little ironic for a platform that's supposed to be about discoverability, but if you're an indie dev, these certainly help make you visible to Jump. Finally, winning an IGF award is good for more than just a badge on your Steam store page. Overall, I'm looking forward to seeing where Jump goes. If it really does turn out to be the Netflix of video games, then the game industry may truly be going the way of movies and televisions. That's not necessarily a bad thing. Think about it. We've been seeing more short games finding success with an emphasis on quality over quantity. There's a glut of content with a few dozen huge, well-financed releases every year, alongside thousands of smaller niche titles, with a few of those hitting it big. Additionally, some of the biggest hits in the game industry have been released in an episodic format. Here's looking at you, Kentucky Route Zero. This is a format that lends itself to being consumed through a subscription service. Now, these are just my ideas on the industry and Jump. What do you think? Is this platform geared towards the future of gaming, and are you happy with the way that video games in general have been moving? Hit us up on Twitter at OneRuleBeCool and share your thoughts. We'd be happy to share them on our next episode of 1RBC Gaming Weekly. Earlier this week, Hob was released on Windows and PS4 by Runic Games. You may have some familiarity with their work, as they did the Torchlight series of ARPGs. Hob, however, is something quite different. An atmospheric puzzle platformer. I got to play a bit of it this week, and thus far I rather like the feeling of the game's world. It's a little reminiscent of Hayao Miyazaki's Castle in the Sky in some respects. Now, this is a story that's told without dialogue. In some ways, it feels like Hyper Light Drifter, but with a more cheerful tone. Now, because the game's story is being told without dialogue, it's all about the action and the interaction between your character and the world. I'm going to have more to say about this game once I've played it some more, but the reviews from players and press are generally positive. That said, some people are saying that the game is in need of polish. Having encountered some frame rate dips and minor bugs myself, I'm a little inclined to agree. That said, if you're after a game with an original world, great atmosphere, and clever puzzles, you owe it to yourself to check out Hob. If you're looking for a great new platformer, good news. Steamworld Dig 2 has been released on the PlayStation 4 and Vita. Released last week on the PC and Switch, It's the latest entry in the Steamworld series, and it features more of the fantastic, exploration-oriented gameplay of its predecessor. Now, in this game, you're on the hunt for your cousin, Rusty, protagonist of the previous game. A mysterious cult has emerged around him in the wake of his disappearance. It's up to you to get down to the bottom of things. I've been playing the game and really love it. I have more to say about it later in this episode, so stick around. Thus far, Steamworld Dig 2 has been getting fantastic reception from both players and the press. The hotly anticipated Cuphead was finally released on Steam after what feels like countless years of teasing. This game is a platformer with a visual style that draws on the animation of the 1930s. It's a super challenging side-scrolling platformer. Now, the game's main appeal is its wild look, which is a big part of what took so long to get the game released. Also, there's the fantastic jazzy soundtrack, which, surprise, was recorded with real instruments, as you can see here. Thus far, Cuphead has been getting great reviews from players and the press. There are some gripes that people have regarding its presentation, namely that you have no idea how close you are to beating the game's bosses until they've beaten you, 3 hits and you're out, and that the game doesn't explain some things as well as it could. But beyond that, everybody is saying that Cuphead is a masterpiece that's been a long time coming thanks to its tight controls, imaginative gameplay, and graphics, as well as a satisfying local co-op experience. Cuphead is available for Windows and the Xbox One. A pretty unusual game hit Steam this week. Originally released in the year 2000, multiplayer RTS Allegiance is now available for Windows on Steam. There are several strange things about the game. For starters, Allegiance was originally developed by Microsoft Research, which is a more experimental branch of the company. When Allegiance was originally released, it got great reviews but didn't sell particularly well. Here's where things get strange. Microsoft released control of Allegiance in 2004 under a shared source license, which thus allowed players to continue development on the game. A strange move for Microsoft, but a welcome one. Earlier this year, Microsoft relicensed Allegiance so that it could be distributed on Steam, which brings us to today. So what sort of game is Allegiance? It's a multiplayer space sim in which most of the players have their own starships. That said, each team has a commander player, for whom the game plays out like a more traditional RTS. So on the whole, Allegiance is weird, but in a good way. I haven't had the chance to play it yet. Steamworld Dig 2 and Hob have me quite busy. That said, it's an incredibly creative game that deserves some attention. The very concept of the game has me excited. I've always been curious as to what an RTS would be like if individual players were your units. I guess now I can finally find out. Finally, we leave you with this video from the developers of Ataribox, in which they explain just what their game is. Thus far, it looks pretty promising. Ataribox was released last week on Steam, but it seems that hardly anybody paid it any heed.
Only 8-player, free-fall shooter with a difference.
It's about collecting mass to score points, grow big, stay big, and control the arena.
So you'll be scoring more points the bigger you are. The goal of the game is to try and score as many points in the 10-minute round as possible.
You grow your character by collecting boxes. These boxes give you mass.
If you manage to collect enough mass, you'll evolve into the final exoform, which is called the Omega exoform.
When you evolve into Omega, you're pretty much a robot god.
He can melt light bridges, destroy other exoforms. He can also use his beam to magnetize lots of mass towards him, and all of the mass that you collect in that final form adds towards your final score.
Don't always go for the big guys because chances are they'll flatten you. Focus on collecting as many boxes as you can so that you can grow until you're big enough to take them on.
Learn the arena. When you're small, look for sneaky pathways which will gain you mass quickly.
When players have been deformed, they will drop their mass for you to pick up.
Around the arena, look out for glowy golden cubes. These are hacks.
My favourite hack is impact. This allows you to push other players, even if they're bigger than you. So you could potentially push a larger player off the map.
At any time you can press the button to teleport. This allows you to escape any fight. You do lose mass and you drop down to less exoform, which is a lot better than being deformed back down to atom size.
So there you have it, straight from the dev team. Collect, grow, fight, dominate.
Well, that's it for this week's game news. Be sure to stick around for our thoughts on Steamworld Dig 2. For all the greatest game news, reviews, interviews, and more, be sure to follow at OneReallyCool on Twitter and Instagram. Follow me at Jordan_Cameron for my own views. The Steamworld franchise has been one of my favorites of recent years. The Steamworld is, as its name suggests, a steampunk universe inhabited by robots, which came to inhabit the Earth and eventually stretch into space after humanity's collapse. Dark as this may sound, the games thus far have been pretty upbeat. While the previous game in the series, Steamworld Heist, was a tactics game of sorts, Steamworld Dig and its subsequent sequel are both Metroidvania platformers centered on digging and exploration. Steamworld Dig 2, however, differs from its predecessor in a few key ways. The game has changed for the better. The story of Steamworld Dig 2 is pretty straightforward. You play as Dorothy, her friends call her Dot. Now, Dorothy is the cousin of Rusty, who was the protagonist of the first game. Rusty, regrettably, went missing at the end of that game after making a big discovery deep underground. It's up to you to figure out just what's happened to him. Meanwhile, a little mining town is being rocked by earthquakes. What's your connection to Rusty's disappearance? Now, I do feel that besides Dorothy and Fen, her traveling companion a little akin to Navi from Ocarina of Time, the game's characters just aren't quite as well written as they are in previous Steamworld games. The town's mayor feels more like a funny caricature than a complex character. He's certainly amusing, but not, in my opinion, representative of the best writing that the Steamworld series has to offer. I also have a minor gripe regarding the timing on the delivery of certain lines. I distinctly remember interacting with one of the bots in the game, and having him inform me of an in-game mechanic that I'd already been using over a few hours of gameplay. Whoops. Otherwise, I have no issues with the game's storytelling and dialogue, which is humorous, simple, and straightforward. The gameplay of Steamworld Dig 2 builds fantastically on its predecessor. The short of it is that as you traverse levels, you use your pickaxe to break through blocks, digging deep into the mine in search of gems to sell to the town. It's in the town that you interact with the game's other characters and upgrade your tools. At its heart, this is the gameplay that I fell in love with in the first game, but there's a fundamental difference. Levels are no longer procedurally generated. Steamworld Dig 2 ditches the random elements of its predecessor for lovingly handcrafted levels. Having played several hours of the sequel, I honestly think that this is a move in the right direction. While I appreciated the replayability that random level generation lent to Steamworld Dig, the handmade levels of its sequel have resulted in something new for the series. Puzzles. Bear in mind that I have not yet completed the game, these are just my thoughts thus far, but so far, the puzzles have felt pretty fair. I don't think that they're all that challenging or complexly designed, but they are satisfying to solve and mix things up a little bit. They diversify the gameplay in the right ways. Now, because Steamworld Dig 2 is a Metroidvania, you can expect to do plenty of backtracking as you upgrade your tools and gain new ones. There's nothing more satisfying than receiving a new tool and realizing that it's just what you need to access a previously blocked-off area or to solve a puzzle that left you stumped earlier in the game. Overall, the platforming is solid. The game controls well and exploration is pretty compelling. There's always some fresh gem hidden a little bit deeper beneath the surface. Now, the game's upgrade system is in itself interesting as it uses a couple different currencies. There are the coins, which are used for buying permanent upgrades to tools, but there are also cogs, which are earned by solving puzzles, beating bosses, of which I have seen woefully few, and uncovering secret areas. They are nicely challenging to find and can be spent to either buff tools with special effects, or to increase the game's challenge level in exchange for more experience points or loot. This isn't the first time that I've seen a game include a system like this. Bastion comes readily to mind. That said, it is very well implemented in Steamworld Dig 2. It enriches the gameplay by allowing players to decide what aspects of the game will be more challenging, but ultimately more rewarding. While the game's largely focused on exploring and digging, it does have a couple different enemies. Sadly, I feel that this is where the game falls a little bit short. The giant mutant beetles that prowl around in the dark aren't particularly challenging to fight, and they just stop feeling threatening after a couple hours, and they're just running back and forth in the same old patterns. While there are other creatures to watch out for in the game, such as a creature that appears to be an incredibly unfriendly hornbill that inexplicably lives underground, there isn't enough variety or quantity of enemies to make the creatures of Steamworld Dig too scary. For a game in which you're constantly wrestling with a shrinking pool of resources, some tools are steam-driven and depend on water, which is in short supply later in the game, it's a little disappointing that the monsters underground don't do much to raise the stakes. That said, the game is not without pressures. I distinctly remember being trapped at some point, low on health, my lantern dark, and water tank empty. I did the only thing I could. I began to dig. There was real tension. I couldn't get back to the surface easily, and I was carrying some precious cargo. I didn't want to die and lose my gems. I'm still making my way through Steamworld Dig 2, and will have more to say about it at a later date. That said, having played much of it, I have to say that this game is absolutely worth picking up. Steamworld Dig 2 is a polished gem. Its levels have been carefully built, and replacing the procedural generation in favor of handcrafted elements has really been for the best. I'm looking forward to seeing what the rest of the game has to offer. Also, it would be a sin to talk about this game and fail to mention its spectacular soundtrack. My favorite song in the game thus far is the smooth, R&B-esque track that plays in town. It's not your typical Western music, but it fits the feel of the game very well. Steamworld Dig 2 is currently available on Windows, Nintendo Switch, PS4, and Vita. What do you think about Steamworld Dig 2? Have you been playing it, or do you plan on picking it up? Hit us up on Twitter at OneRuleBeCool and let us know.